is primarily a seed eater, particularly seeds of trees such as oak, beech, and ash. They are mainly active during the dark, yet sometimes they are out at daytime. The mouse compensates for its poor eyesight, relying on its sense of smell to locate food and to avoid predators. It must be cautious. Enemies are everywhere.
And now the end is near, and so I face.
A whole family brutally murdered on a Saturday night with no suspects or clues in sight. Who could have done this terrible deed? What was their motive? In Cold Blood follows this case to find the answers to the many questions this murder creates.
I've lived.
In this documentary novel depicting the savage murder of 4 members of the Clutter family from Holcomb, Kansas, Truman Capote describes the family, how they were killed, and the months to follow as detectives struggled to find the murderers who left almost no clues behind. As the detectives uncovered their trail and finally captured the murderers, Capote explains the trial, the murderers' jail time, and finally, their execution. Capote wrote this novel theorizing that journalism and creative writing could come together in the form of what he called the nonfiction novel. He chose murder as the subject, saying the human heart being what it is, murder was a theme not likely to darken and yellow with time. Capote himself was against the death penalty, stating that the public sentiment is very much opposed to it, and the courts have allowed this endless policy of appeal to such a degree that a person can be 11, 12, 13, 14 years under a sentence of capital punishment. It then becomes, in effect, an extreme, unusual, and cruel punishment. This novel brings up many reasons why the death penalty should be abolished. This quote by Capote shows the unconstitutionality of it, the punishment becoming extreme, unusual, and cruel, one of the many reasons why the death penalty should be abolished. The death penalty is not swiftly providing justice, but slowly dragging out for years the ultimate demise of the criminal. And while the criminal is waiting, they are typically not sitting around and regretting their actions. The criminals are trying to elongate their time in prison, proving the ineffectiveness of capital punishment. This is shown in the novel when the prisoners have to wait over 5 years to be executed, and all the while they are trying to appeal their execution. Death row prisoners in the United States typically spend more than a decade awaiting execution. By waiting this long, the punishment of death itself is not used. The punishment turns into solitary confinement as the prisoners are left alone for about 23 hours a day in their cell. The prisoner's mental state deteriorates as they are isolated and anxious, constantly wondering when their execution will come. Sarah H. Cleveland, a law professor at Columbia and a former State Department official, says, "There was a gap between the United States and much of the rest of the world on this point. Foreign courts have ruled that living for decades under the threat of imminent execution is a form of psychological torment." This is acknowledged by the Supreme Court, stating in Foster v. Florida that long delays between sentencing and execution, compounded by a prisoner's uncertainty over a time of execution, could be agonizing, resulting in horrible feelings and immense mental anxiety, amounting to a great increase in the offender's punishment. When the punishment becomes this solitary confinement for years and years, it results in the cruel and unusual punishment that should be prevented by the Eighth Amendment. Not only is the death penalty unconstitutional, but the method used to execute the offenders is not necessarily painless and quick, thus creating another issue with capital punishment. Out of the 38 states that have the death penalty, 37 use lethal injection, while Nebraska uses the electric chair. Research has shown that the lethal injection meant to sleep, paralyze, then kill the offender is not always as easy as it seems. The Human Rights Committee has ruled that capital punishment must be carried out in such a way as to cause the least possible physical and mental suffering. The lethal injection anesthetic is not always effective, so the offender is awake and can feel everything that is happening to them, or they have been paralyzed and cannot show that they are in pain. The punishment then becomes physically cruel to the offender, violating the Eighth Amendment. When using the death penalty, we may be killing men or women who never committed a crime. When we execute an offender, they are gone forever. We can never go back and set them free. This happened in the case Ruben Cantu v. Texas. Ruben Cantu was given the death penalty for the murder of Pedro Gomez. Police never found physical evidence from the scene or a murder weapon. They had to rely on the eyewitness account of Juan Morano, who was shot along with Gomez and severely injured. This eyewitness account was disputed, as defense attorneys who appealed Cantu's case multiple times attacked police for coercing the only witness to the crime. Later, Morano recanted his testimony, saying he felt pressured by authorities to identify him. This case is a disturbing one. Is it fair to execute a person if there is any doubt that they are the true offender? To kill an innocent person while the true offender roams free.
Whom I did not know. I had no idea that there had ever been a question about the result in the Cantu case, or that anybody was looking at it for that matter.
I met with him in his office in a quiet room. We spent an hour. I took him through it step by step slowly. I showed him the fact that Juan Moreno had said that he had never believed that Ruben Cantu was the shooter, that he felt that he had to identify Cantu because that's who police wanted him to identify.
Although there are many reasons to abolish the death penalty, others argue that it is the only way to justly punish those who have killed.
I mean, I thought he was a very nice gentleman. And I thought so right up till I slit his throat.
Capital punishment is the only way to keep brutal killers from re-entering society and is a humane, fair way to deal with the vicious criminal. Execution is the only suitable consequence for murderers. David Mulhausen, a researcher for the Heritage Foundation, argues that some crimes are so heinous and inherently wrong that they demand strict penalties, up to and including life sentences or even death. The death penalty is a fitting punishment for these criminals, and they deserve to be executed. The murderer must be disciplined to the same degree as their victim. If they chose to kill someone, the criminal knows the punishment and are expected to take their punishment. The Supreme Court determined that capital punishment is appropriate and can be used, making it a fair consequence for murder. The death penalty has always been a punishment in the United States, and in the case Glossop v. Gross in 2015, Justice Anton Scalia wrote in reference to the death penalty, "It is impossible to hold unconstitutional that which the Constitution explicitly contemplates." Despite what Justice Scalia writes, the death penalty is not morally right, making it an immoral practice that we should not have in society. It sends a confusing message, as we are told not to kill by the government as the government is executing people. The death penalty also takes away the most basic rights of citizens, their right to live, which former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg argued in 1976 that the deliberate, institutionalized taking of human life by the state is the greatest conceivable degradation to the dignity of the human personality. There is no justice in an eye for an eye, and only allows for a barbaric society. If we want our society to continue to move forward and improve, we must abolish the death penalty, which only takes away citizens' rights and does not benefit our country. In Cold Blood makes many statements on why the murderers should be executed and why they should be allowed to live. However, the most compelling argument is that they should not be killed. By giving the murderers this punishment, we are effectively ending their lives mentally, as they must sit and wait as the execution is slow to come, and when it comes, taking away their right to live. As the murderers wait, more people come to death row, showing the ineffectiveness as more join. States need to repeal capital punishment for life without parole, and then we can move forward and change our society. The death penalty is an interesting topic that we must think about, research, and vote on to change. There has got to be a better way to make sure the prisoners are getting a constitutional punishment that allows them to regret what they have done. In Cold Blood helps begin this discussion, and now we can understand how to improve our laws.
I did everything I could. Okay. I truly did.